In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form or shape, with darkness over the abyss and a mighty wind sweeping over the waters, then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Genesis 1:1. Have those who disbelieve not considered that the heavens and the earth were sewn together, and we rent them asunder, when we made every living thing from water? Will they not then believe? And we placed firm mountains in the earth, lest it shake them. And we made wide tracks between them as paths, that haply they may be guided. And we made the sky canopy preserved, yet they turn away from its signs. Quran 21:30. Earth. One of the marvels of God's creation, according to both Islamic and Christian faiths. It was a realm created for all beings of the earth, ranging from the smallest of bacteria to the largest of whales. And somewhere in the midst of all that creation came humankind. We were fruitful and multiplied. We spread over the world, becoming one of the most so-called successful species. Unfortunately, as part of our success, God's creation is dying at our hands. All across the globe, climate change, ecological devastation, and overpollution have been causing mass extinction and possibly irreversible damage. With about 50% of the world being Christian or Muslim, how much responsibility do these groups hold to the planet and its caretaking? This video is an examination into Muslim-Christian perspectives on climate change. What are they? Where are they the same? Where do they differ? And how do these perspectives contribute to the fixing of our Earth? All these questions we will seek to answer by the end of this video. The question of what is humankind's job on Earth is one which is highly debated in the realm of theology. On one side of the spectrum, we have humankind as any other type of animal. We're no more special than the rest. We've only managed to be a bit more successful. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have humankind as the most important of God's creation, lording over all the earth. And to understand these two viewpoints, and keeping them in mind, will be critical in the following discussion over Muslim-Christian dialogue when it comes to climate change. Part 2. The Christian perspective. One important note for the following sections is that one cannot simply state something as the entire overarching perspective for a faith tradition. While I will be using terms such as Christian perspective and Muslim perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean that each and every sector of such wildly diverse and interesting faith traditions have full unanimity. Rather, I will be using terms with sources that have a great amount of scholarly weight in backing in their respective traditions. For example, I'll be using excerpts from Laudato Si, which is Christian but more specifically Catholic. And it's important to note that not every Christian group accepts the Pope, but that doesn't mean that his scholarly analysis doesn't hold great weight. And with that disclaimer out of the way, we can begin our examination into these faith-based groups and our analysis of climate change. Let's start with a broader Christian perspective on what our responsibility is to the earth. As Pope Francis points out in Laudato Si, human beings frequently seem to see no other meaning in their natural environment than what serves for immediate use and consumption. The destruction of the human environment is extremely serious, not only because God has entrusted the world to us men and women, but because human life is itself a gift, which must be defended from various forms of debasement. Laudato Si, Section 5. The key word to notice in this section is entrust. God has assigned us the responsibility to take care of the earth and protect it from destruction. We have a duty to be steward of the land and ensure that it's taken care of. And where the notion of stewardship began to get mixed up is in the distinction between dominion and domination. There became a mindset that we should be allowed to do whatever we want to the earth. However, this is fundamentally an unchristian idea. For unless we decide to return to paganism, cultivating the world seems to be the only way to respect, once again, the sacrality of nature and face the ecological crisis. Christians are called from the very beginning to take care of the earth, and our failure to protect the environment is a religious issue, not entirely a science-based one. Unfortunately, there's actually a large section of the Christian community who are clearly not on board with the climate call to action. In a 2016 poll, 57% of the broader Christian community doesn't believe that human beings cause climate change. And that number is even higher in the evangelical community, with 81% not believing that humans are at fault. These numbers are no laughing matter. Around 1/3 of the world's population is Christian, meaning that from that third, less than half actually believe that we are the root cause of climate change. A large section of a skeptical population can spell disaster when it comes to making legislative change. The US specifically is a Christian-dominant nation, with about 3/4 identifying with the Christian faith. The US is a key player in climate crisis, and without it on board, actual climate change reversal will be impossible. However, not all hope is lost, for there are certainly Christian organizations focused on creating change for the better when it comes to the climate action. There's one particular group, Arocha, which began in 1983, which has been on the forefront of ecological conservation through a Christian lens. It was first only in the Philippines, but now has spread out to over 20 different countries globally. They focus on taking science and faith-based approach, where they help Christian communities see a connection between faith and conservation, as once Christians are convinced of the link between conservation and faith, they are often highly motivated to act and do something about it, even if they were not particularly interested before. And once we have a sense of the Muslim perspective on climate change, we can begin to do a deeper dive into Arocha and Muslim-based faith organizations. Part 3. The Muslim perspective. Now that we've gotten the Christian perspective, it is time to understand what the Muslim perspective is on climate change. Spoiler alert, it's actually rather similar in effect to the Christian perspective. I say this as while they may have different textual backings, they both share a same end goal. That end goal being the healing of this planet and the permanent reversal of ecological devastation. But where are the roots of this idea in Islam? Well, there are two main bases in the Islamic faith for why it's critical we maintain the planet. First, there are the universal laws of justice and balance. And secondly, there's the idea that humans have to be vicegerent here on Earth and are meant to bring prosperity to all creatures. In other words, we're meant to be stewards. Let's first start with justice and balance. This idea stems from Quran 55, section 5 through 9, which reads, "The sun and the moon are upon a reckoning, and the stars and the trees prostrate heaven. He raises in the balance of justice. He set that you transgress not in the balance. So set right the weight, and fall not short in the balance." Notice how balance is mentioned 3 times here. Ecological destruction is anything but balance. It is an example of the extreme lack of balance in our world, for we are tipping nature away from its resting axis, and at a point in our near future it could completely topple over, leaving us with a shattered nature. This is why we are pushed to have balance in our lives and the world from an Islamic perspective. Once again, it is critical we not transgress the balance. The second basis is very similar to the one we noticed in the Christian perspective. Just like Christianity, Islam calls for all people to be stewards of the earth and responsible for its prosperity. Allah gave mankind dominion over the land and trusted them to properly take care of it. To rule with domination instead is to go against Allah. Part 4. Muslim-Christian working together. Now that we've understood the basis for both Muslim and Christian calls to ecological action, we can look towards a specific example to see how their views of ecological conservation actually play out. The case study I'll be looking at is actually a joint action between Christian, Islamic, and civil groups to preserve the forests of Ghana. More specifically, they've been working to maintain the Mole National Park. The Ghana case was one which was spearheaded by Arocha, the Christian organization, in collaboration with various Islamic and other faith-based groups. It was critical that there was a joint dialogue between these groups, as it allowed for a broader and more effective outreach. For if one wishes to reach someone of a faith background, it's critical you have a speaker from their same faith. After all, it's much easier to propose a shift in an already existing mindset, rather than to create an entirely new one. Another important note about Ghana is that the people at hand are not necessarily to blame for their unsustainable habits. Mole National Park is bordered by 30 different very poor communities that rely heavily on the park's resources, especially during dry season. Many of these people saw that there was no other choice between destruction and survival. So they used unsustainable practices such as poaching and tree cutting for firewood and honey because they saw that as their only choice. What the Joint Action Group had to do was educate the people, ensure that they would listen, and give them the resources that they needed. What their project did was it provided a startup package, which included capital, equipment, and training in agro-processing and utilization of non-timber forest products. The package also promoted income-generating activities, like the processing of kvass and shea nut and beekeeping. And these actions were successful. They led to over a 220% increase in household incomes for many of the families, as well as led to a sustainable use of the forest. In sustaining the environment, everyone was better off. In showing the people that this was a religious issue, and then showing them an alternative, it allowed the people to have a backing behind why they were making these changes, and it gave them the proper moral support. In conclusion, climate change is a global issue that affects us all no matter what our religion may be. This is why dialogue and cooperation between Muslim and Christian communities is so very important, as when they work together in a dialogue of action, real change is able to be made, as we saw with the Ghana case study. Climate change is an issue which affects both faith communities, and it's imperative to address it. So what we have to do now is ensure that we actually end up addressing climate change, and not simply let the end times come. Thank you.